If you can knock out some insane shots in the script phase before you even start shooting, you're gonna save so much money.
Because you don't want to shoot a bunch of stuff, then get into post, then realize it's not gonna work and it's gonna be way out of budget, and then not have the coverage that you need to then have to then do new shoot dates to then get that coverage, you know, to sort of remove something that could have been fixed in the script phase.
What's up everyone, Jake here, your indie VFX guy, and today I'm talking shop with my cousins Grace and Kilo Akuna. We talk about their work at Encore VFX and we'll see if there are any lessons we can learn from creating visual effects for the big studio shows that we can apply to the indie world. But before we get into the interview, if you want to learn more about how you can save both time and money in post-production, hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video, render me a thumbs up and let me know you want more interviews like this. With that, let's catch up with Grace and Kilo. Grace, Kilo, welcome. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing good.
So Grace, tell me a little bit about your position in the visual effects department.
I started off as an asset coordinator, which was fantastic. Basically, it's a department within visual effects that creates anything from simple rocks and shrubbery to vast snowy landscapes to full digi replicas of human beings. And then I became a show coordinator, which was basically organizing shows, making sure that due dates were being hit, relaying all kinds of information to various departments within the visual effects for my specific shows that I was on. And then from there, I became a VFX producer. And
Kilo, bring me up to speed on what you do in VFX.
Latest thing was a CG Supervisor. So I was CG supervising some episodes for Twisted Metal. I did Virgin River. I did this movie that's coming out probably this year, Shadow Force, Big Fat Greek Wedding, just a bunch of stuff. And before that, I was more of a technical artist. So I've done like rigging, I've done some cloth dynamics, I've done a lot of tracking and layout, which is like figuring out where the cameras go, and also like environment recreation, all that fun kind of stuff.
I want to really talk about the pipeline and kind of start from the beginning and kind of work our way to the end of it. Grace, when a production gets started with you, at what point in production would they reach out to the VFX studio? Like after they've already shot, do they reach out while in pre-production? Do they reach out in the script phase?
If the show is well managed and organized, they'll be doing it during the script phase. Because especially if you've got a lot of visual effects, basically, ideally what you would have is a VFX supervisor on set as it's being shot. Because there's certain shots that if you have a vision for them, they should be shot in certain ways to more like effectively create that in visual effects, right? So there's like certain angles that you might want, certain lighting that you might need, and a visual effects supervisor on set will make sure that you're getting everything that you need, right? So depending on how organized or how much of a budget a certain show might have, they'll involve you from kind of like the beginning, right? Other shows, they'll kind of just send you whatever they have and they're like, can you do this? And you're like, yes, but it's going to cost this much and it's going to take this much time. And they're like, damn, okay. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it's not okay. And they're like, can you do that for 10% of what you coded? And you're like, well, maybe you should try someone else.
So not too much is different from the indie world versus the big studio world either too then. As a VFX producer in that process, where do you take it through production then?
The producers and the VFX soup will kind of negotiate what the client expectations are, right? They'll go through scripts or they'll go through quick times. They'll bid it out. They'll send it to the client. And if the client approves it, if we get awarded the bid, that's when, it begins. That's when the project begins for us. As a coordinator, you'll help coordinate a bunch of information on like what the expectations are. You're working with your comp soup, you're working with your, technical directors in your studio to make sure that your show is set up to meet the deliverables that the client is expecting. If it's a client that you've been with for a long time, you kind of know what they're looking for, which is great. If it's a new client, you may need a little bit more back and forth, and it may need to be a little bit more communication to make sure that we're hitting what they want. And then you're also updating bids because the client will be like, hey, can you also do this? Oh, I noticed this and it bugs me. Can you paint this out in every shot? And if they do that, you're not just going to do that for free. You have to then bid that. You have to take out, count those shots, figure out, okay, how much is this going to cost? Do we want to outsource it? Do we want to do this in-house? Like, how complicated is it? Yada, yada, yada. And then you're sending updated bids to for client approval.
So Kilo, tell me a little bit about when your job comes into play, where does that start? And are you starting with material that people are giving you, or are you involved in the pre-production as well?
So that also depends on the show, but it's almost like the bidding process where you're breaking down everything that's going to be in it. And I have to figure out then like what artists we're going to need to get the movie done at the beginning, because sure enough, once you get the footage, it's sort of its own thing again. Because, for example, maybe you have something where you're expecting a ridiculously huge like CG environment that needs to get built because of how it's described in the script. But then once you get the footage, I mean, the environment already looks good, right? And so they don't need that CG environment anymore. Maybe all you need is a matte painting to fix the very back. And those are the sort of discussions that I'm part of. And then we relay that to the coordinators, we relay that to the producers, and then they disperse out that information.
I think it's really interesting how when you're talking about something in pre-production versus when you actually get the footage in post, that it can become a totally different animal, for better or worse. Do you ever have a situation where like you're like, okay, we're prepping for this big thing, you're putting the team together, and then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, all that's out the window. We don't need all of you now.
That does happen. And the latest movie we worked on, I had an artist building a full CG environment, and we were just, slowly picking away on it while they work on other things, because at the studio that we were at, artists worked on a lot of different shows at one time, and we would just prioritize it based off of what was coming up. So he was slowly working on this environment, and then we got the footage, and I realized that it was only needed for one overhead shot. And I was like, we can have a compositor. I'll build out some basic mesh, and we have a compositor do a matte painting on it, and it's going to look even better. And they're like, oh. So we did that. We went that route, and it looks real, like absolutely real.
What do you do when you have a situation where it's the opposite of what we talked about, where you start with X expectations and your footage comes in and you're like, oh no, this was not shot right at all?
Yeah. So for those situations, the biggest thing is to call it out ASAP, especially if you're working on TV shows. With something becoming a bigger deal, it means it takes more time. And sometimes you don't have time. So you really got to call it out. And sometimes the client will just, scrap ideas. That does happen. You don't necessarily want that to happen. But other times, they're going to approve the overages, because you're going to need people working overtime. Like maybe now you need animators and you need a new rig, and that takes time. And, you got to communicate it, and then they got to see if they can afford it. And if they can't, then you try the 2D approach as good as you can.
When a client comes to you with a screenplay, how do you go about doing a script breakdown, and what do you look for, and how do you bid on that?
Script bidding is sort of, and like script breakdowns, it's a little bit of a science and an art at the same time. So I'm looking for things that are like, okay, this cat talks. That's an obvious VFX thing. Okay, these people have black eyes. You know what? That could potentially be a 2D maybe enhancement on their makeup and stuff like that. This person has blood running down their nose. Maybe that could be a 2D or a 3D thing, right? So I'm just like, honestly, I'm reading through the script, and I'm just looking, I'm like highlighting for things that I'm like, ooh, you sound VFX-y. You sound like maybe we could do something with that, and you're just highlighting all that stuff. But I'm looking for stuff that sounds like it can't be done practically. Or maybe it can, and it might just need a little bit of VFX magic. So it's not like a set answer, but it's a little bit of a science and an art is what I like to say.
when I'm going through a script for a script breakdown, one of the things that like I'm always flagging things. I just assume everything is going to be a visual effect shot until I have a further follow-up conversation with the client. Because you never know what they do have access to, what they don't have access to. Oftentimes, especially on the indie level, things get scaled down tremendously, and you need to accent and you need to augment everything with visual effects. So what would you say is something that maybe the screenwriter, director, producer may not expect to be a VFX shot, but you find come across your desk more often than not?
I also do the same thing when I'm looking through scripts and storyboards. Same thing, is just assume everything and then let the client tell you no. One thing that I find is VFX a lot is like monitors and cell phone screens. I mean, they don't have to be. And when you're reading a script, you won't assume it necessarily. Most people won't. Oh, they're looking at their tags or whatever. You message them, but a lot of times that ends up being some 2D comp stuff. A lot of times.
I have a whole video I just shot all just purely about screen comps, and the thing because with the indie world, they give you a script and they're telling me, okay, explosions, gunfire. I'm like, phone, someone answer the phone, someone answer the phone, someone answer the phone. It's the least glamorous stuff.
Or they walk into a specific building or something like that, and it's like, oh, the signage, always the signage.
Yeah.
Signage everywhere. Reflection of the signage.
Oh, you're filming this in downtown? Okay, well, you're going to need to get rid of a lot of the ads that are
just
around
driving.
You don't have the rights.
Driving. Yes.
Just driving, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, screen comps, that's definitely one. Is there any others that like kind of come to mind, or any
beauty work?
The beauty work, I was gonna say pimples, wrinkles.
You won't get that in scripts either.
Hairs.
The big theme that I'm trying to reinforce with independent filmmakers is pre-production. What level of pre-production comes your way, and do you often find yourselves working with a filmmaker who maybe doesn't have all that done, but then you kind of explain, okay, in order to give you a proper bid, I need to actually see what you have in mind. So bring me something or have us make you something. Maybe you could just elaborate on the topic of that.
That's a funny question, because pretty much every show that we work on is different. A lot of the DC shows, we would actually get previs, and that was awesome. That was really cool. We get storyboards and
did
previs.
You get it from DC or like Warner Brothers, or it was already done in-house?
Sometimes it was done in-house. Sometimes it was other studios. Some of the previous studios would be doing it. It's sort of a mix. And we did have an in-house storyboard artist who would work with the client specifically for those shows. And then those storyboards would become previs either from our animators. We had a couple animators that were really, really fast at it. And sometimes it would just be from another vendor. And those, I mean, previs is awesome. It does a lot. It says a lot. I mean, there's a lot of productions that can't afford it. They shoot their thing and then they have to air too. So time-wise, sometimes it doesn't work. But there was plenty of big shows that we didn't even really get anything. There's no storyboards, no previs, barely got a script. Because there's a lot of TV shows nowadays that almost like flying by the seat of their pants. They're doing their own thing, but they'll shoot out the work to like 10 different vendors. And so you might just get like one specific effect that you're doing for this show. And you just do it for that episode and any other episode that effect appears. And for that, usually what we'll do is, and Grace has probably ran into this too, but we'll just ask for any sort of reference that they can give us of what they think it should look like. And maybe even some drawn on stuff, which is sort of like the indie ways, like just draw on a frame of where you want things to hit.
Totally. Yeah, there's definitely times where you'll receive references from the client, and the client thinks that this is what they want. And then once you send them back that exact reference put into their shot, they're like, this is not actually what we want. And so then it becomes kind of like a dance where you're like, okay, so what do we have time and resources to do? How can we kind of like, what actually is your vision and how do we feel we can make that happen, right? So sometimes you might be led astray even by client references, and you're just trying to do your best to give them what you believe they want. And that's when it gets a little bit difficult. I mean, a lot of bit difficult, because it's like you're just running in the dark. You're just hoping for the best, because again, a lot of times it'll be like TV shows or, like TV shows where it has like tight deadlines, and you're like, man, this was due yesterday. and you want us to change all of these shots that we only had to do this one effect for. And you had given us these references, and now you want, instead of blue lightning, you want purple smoke. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of a dance, and it helps a lot when you have a very strong vision and you know what you want.
That's the biggest thing. Yeah. Having that strong vision. Anytime you work with a client with a very strong vision and they know what they want, it usually goes smoothly. Like, we ran into things where, like, they told us they needed this thing to be made out of steel, and they show all these like references of it, and it's all made out of steel, and like, follow this, and then you do it and you go through it and you put it in 20 shots, and then they're like, no, we wanted a wooden one. You're like, what?
No, this is all good, and especially I like reinforcing the idea of pre-production, because that is, I think, the independent filmmaker's greatest tool is pre-production. I feel like it's far underutilized. What lessons can we learn from this that can help the independent filmmaker who doesn't have the kind of budget, say, DC or Warner Brothers or any of them have to do their shows?
I've worked on some indie films and they don't have a lot of money, right? So that's the big thing. They can't just hire people out. So they might not have a storyboard artist to do storyboards for them. But even if they do their own breakdowns of what things should look like and generally what kind of shots they're going to be shooting, if they know any sort of 3D packaging, you can do some stuff. But I would recommend them really trying to break down their own scripts too, and trying to figure out what they want and what they want things to look like. Maybe have some sort of vision boards of stuff already made. There's some good software out there for that as well. They can make all their own reference, put it all together, and they're already sort of figuring it out in their head of what they want. Location scouts are good. They can get, sometimes if they're doing location scouts, if they can get scans, because especially since you can do scans on your phone now, sometimes that'll allow artists to start working on assets before it's even shot. And a lot of times with these indie projects, what they don't have is money, but what they do have is time. Things that buy them more time are things like getting scans, getting HDRIs, even on location scouts. I know the lighting won't be the same. And sometimes a lot of times the set might be different if you're doing actual set dressing. But, for some things, it just works fine. And it will actually save a lot of time.
If you're an independent filmmaker, one, that's awesome. Please keep doing what you're doing. Just produce whatever media you can and let the productions go. But just know that you've got to temper your expectations. And like Kilo said, try and break down your own script. See what you can do practically and what you're okay, like this is fine as is, and what you feel like you want to splurge, like what enhances the storytelling. You just need to figure out like what enhances the storytelling and what those critical shots are to use visual effects for. Because if you're an independent filmmaker, like you guys said, a lot of times you don't have a big budget. So what you want to do is be very specific on what you use visual effects for. And again, it's all about the storytelling when it comes to independent filmmaking. So utilize visual effects to enhance the storytelling, not to just be like, oh, fancy, we have visual effects, but to make sure that you're telling the story that you want to tell.
You remind me of a project that I worked on, and I was working directly with the showrunner in pre-production, and they were developing the scripts right up until they started shooting. And so I'm going through the script with him and we're breaking things down. I said, this thing right here, kind of big. I don't know, like given everything we're doing over here, I don't know if we're going to be able to handle this. He goes, 1 sec. All right, it's not there anymore. So like,
that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Yeah, if you can sit down with someone like Jake, when you're doing your script writing, or even after you get with some rough drafts, you can get someone who's, a VFX supervisor, someone who's done this stuff just to look over it. That could save a lot of money. So
for sure. Like if you can knock out some insane shots that aren't necessarily necessary, for lack of a better word, in the script phase before you even start shooting, you're going to save so much money. You're going to save so much money. You'll get rid of the fat that you don't need and make sure that your story is streamlined.
Because what you don't want to happen, and I've worked on shows like this, and I've worked on movies like this, is you don't want to shoot a bunch of stuff, then get into post, then realize it's not going to work and it's going to be way out of budget, and then not have the coverage that you need to then have to then do new shoot dates to then get that coverage, to sort of remove something that could have been fixed in the script phase. Yeah, the bigger budget things do that, but it might even change. But as an indie person, you don't want.
Kilo, can you tell me about MEGAFIVE?
So MEGAFIVE, that was my independent company that I had it was me and 4 other friends. Mm-hmm. So it was 5 of us, MEGAFIVE. And we did commercials, we did some music videos, we did the Lindsey Sterling music video, We Are Giants. For that, we had about a month and a half, which is very aggressive. We did a lot of previs for that. Characters were designed. We gave a bunch of different character designs. We did it all really quick. I think it was like a week or 2. And for Lindsey Sterling, I think we ended up having like 30 artists, maybe some more at the end working on it, all people that we knew. That is fun because that's like a different side of it. When you're actually running things and dealing with the client directly, it's a little bit different than being a lead or a supervisor at a big studio.
That's why I wanted to ask about MEGAFIVE, is because I see that you have the experience from something small to something big. Like, I mean, I say relatively small to something big in the client relations. And so I would assume that in that case, especially too, pre-production was like a massive thing because you can't just throw money at a problem in post, right?
No, you couldn't at all. But for a lot of these, the cool thing was we did a lot of little like horror shorts, and the writers were also our friends. So we're figuring it out, and we're just sort of like playing around. It'd be things like maybe we just go out and start filming things for R&D. That's something else you can do as an indie. If you have some idea and you have a VFX friend out there that's going to be part of the process, you can just start shooting some stuff, come up with some ideas, some little proofs of concept beforehand, before it goes crazy. By the end of it, it was more like what we'd use the company for is we'd get clients. So I had like a horror film that came in. They had a certain budget. So it'd come in through the company and it'd be like me VFX souping a horror short and then budgeting it out. And what the funny thing is, whenever I would budget it out, we would have a sit down and I would bring in the artists, because for me, I wanted them to see what the process was like, especially for something this small, and just get their ideas of what they think it should be budgeted, based off their hours. And the funny thing is, through that process, they usually realize that they under budget. So as an indie VFX artist, you need to realize that sometimes you're going to under budget things at first, and you might get burned if you do that. Because what I ended up budgeting for like this horror thing was like double what they were thinking. And then it ended up being more in line with what I was saying by the end of it.
Yeah, that's especially in the indie world, everybody kind of under budgets these things because you see YouTube tutorials everywhere. So you're like, oh, well, that's just somebody putting time in. And you're like, it's somebody putting time in.
Exactly.
That's what artist hours are, every little thing, you want to change it or something, the more artist hours, so that, yeah. Thank you guys so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I think it's going to be really helpful for the independent film scene to really understand what goes into visual effects, both for the big studios versus the small studios. And you guys have brought so much to the table. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was
this was awesome.
Thanks so much for watching. And if you want to save both time and money on your VFX in post-production, make sure to subscribe right up there and click over there to check out the next video. I've been Jake, and remember to always reframe what's possible.